latest data and insights from our Traveler Trends Tracker. Carolyn Corda is an industry leader in customer data and predictive intelligence. As the Chief Marketing Officer of Adara, she's responsible for aligning the brand with the company's expanding mission and growth goals. Prior to Adara, she was the Managing Director at Accenture, where she led the applied intelligence practice for the travel sector. Before that role, Carolyn was a senior executive at Epsilon with responsibility for developing and launching new data solutions. With that, I'll hand it over to Carolyn to begin our webinar for today.
Thank you, Niharika, and welcome all. We'll cover 3 topics today. First, a few notes on our COVID Resource Center. Then, as Niharika said, we'll dive into some of our latest trends. And we're delighted to have with us as a special guest, Raj Singh. He and David will be exploring new priorities in the customer experience. First, a reminder, all the slides that you're seeing will be sent out after the webinar. Now, for those who aren't familiar with Adara, you might wonder where the data I'm presenting today comes from. We have over 270 consumer brands that share their data with us, including some you likely recognize: United, Marriott, Singapore Airlines, and Travelport. As a result, we have a lot of data. Typically, we see over 14 billion searches a year and almost 1 billion air and hotel bookings. We're able to get fairly granular on transaction behavior, as most of our 1 billion profiles have on average 30 data points profile. We've made a lot of our trend data available on our website. It's organized by region: US, EMEA, and APAC. You'll see the URL here so you can access the data yourself. We do update it daily, so check back often for the latest. The insights you're seeing today have been developed by Adara's brilliant analytics team. Of course, you're welcome to reach out to them if you're interested in custom reports and insights. We've made it easy with the purple request button. Also today, we'll have Milan Patel, who leads our analytics, on tap during my presentation. So if you have questions about the trends or need to clarify one of the charts, just put it in the chat box. Now let's turn to what we're seeing for summer travel in the US. While we obviously have data for other time periods and for business travel, many of my clients have been laser focused on summer travel as a gauge for the overall recovery. We'll be looking at 4 holiday periods: 4th of July, the first half and second half of August, and then finally Labor Day. Here are all 4 periods of the summer. I faded out the August periods so we can really focus on Independence Day and Labor Day. The pink columns are air bookings and the purple columns are hotel bookings. This shows the year-over-year change in volume, and it's all negative below the 0 axis. So in this case, the shorter column means less negative and is indicative of a stronger recovery. Compared to where the industry has been during the depths of COVID, 80–90% below 2019, these figures represent a modest improvement with what looks like more demand for hotels. Air bookings are down 70.3% for Independence Day, while hotel bookings are off 49.3%. The gap between air and hotel booking demand narrows by the time we get to Labor Day, with air down 67.7% and hotels down 54.4%. Now, you generally expect air and hotel to track more closely. And while some will speculate that the larger gap is attributable to the drive market, we'll see in a couple of minutes that there are other factors at play. Before I share the ranking of the most popular summer vacations, I'd like to offer a victory lap to Adara's outstanding analytical team for spotting the demand for Las Vegas back in late April. At the time, consumer polls and the press reported that consumers were unlikely to be traveling, certainly not to high-density destinations, and certainly not via long air trips. There on the left, you see a sampling of the headlines, such as 2/3 of Americans won't travel for at least 3 months after COVID-19 subsides. By now, we've all seen the articles and the pictures documenting the crowds returning to Las Vegas over the past couple of weeks. But at the end of April, when we first reported that Las Vegas had jumped 10 spots compared to 2019 to become the 4th most popular destination for Memorial Day and was ranked number 1 for Labor Day, that was a surprising revelation. I've presented our analysis to a few of our clients during May and gave them a chance to guess the top spot. No one guessed that Las Vegas was going to be the most popular travel destination. Adara's data and analytics revealed what others caught on to a few weeks later, that places like Las Vegas and Miami were attracting the first wave of travelers. With that as our track record, here's the lineup for the rest of the summer. This chart breaks down the top 8 destinations based on air booking volume and hotel booking volume. The percentages reflect a year-over-year comparison for the period from May 1 to June 8, comparing 2019 to 2020. We've highlighted Miami, Las Vegas, and Orlando to underscore that the trend we saw 6 weeks ago is continuing, with high-density destinations attracting considerable demand. As we saw just a slide or two ago, there's considerable gap in the volume of air bookings, which are down 50 to 80% compared to last year, and the volume of hotel bookings, which for the top 3 destinations are only off 10% compared to last year. While an increase in the drive market undoubtedly plays a role, there's an event earlier in the year that has shifted air bookings. Back in early March, the airlines reduced their chain penalties and made it more attractive to book trips in March for travel later in the year. You'll see 2 big amber peaks on the chart on the left as booking volume doubled for trips more than 3 months out. Interestingly, 3 destinations got the lion's share of the bookings. You see in the chart on the right, proportions of bookings to all other U.S. destinations dropped about 20%, from 56 to 37. While Orlando, Las Vegas, and Miami, you see in the chart as they are in purple, green, and turquoise, all got an increase. Compared to typical booking patterns, Miami and Las Vegas got more than 50% bump, while Orlando got a 30% boost. The airline's policy changes and attractive fares hold bookings for summer to take place, to be booked and purchased in March, while hotel reservations for summer have primarily been booked in May and June. Based on this timing difference and other patterns that we're seeing, we're predicting that there's more flying, more people are flying to their summer destination than is currently being reported in consumer sentiment surveys and in the press. The drumbeat for the last 2 months has been all about the drive market. When journalists call me from CNN and from the Wall Street Journal, that's the story that they're writing. And while the drive market is important, if you're solely focused on the drive market, you may be missing out. Here's the evidence. We analyzed hotel bookings made from May 1 to June 8 for 4 Florida markets. If the traveler who made the reservation was from either Florida or close by feeder states, such as Georgia, South Carolina, and Alabama, then that booking was put into the drive market. If it was from another state, then we presumed that the mode of transportation was flight. By excluding origin states that were beyond a 10-hour and more drive, we separated the drive from the fly market. Obviously, this isn't a perfect method. Are there people in Chicago that are driving with their family to Orlando? Absolutely. At the same time, there are people that are more local that are flying. They're within a 10-hour bound that are certainly flying. Once we have categorized the drive and fly bookings for hotels, we then compare the proportions of bookings made during the same period last year for each of these 4 Florida destinations. The pink part of the circle is for those driving to the hotel. Purple is for those that are flying to the hotel. The inner ring is 2019 and the outer ring is 2020. You can see for Orlando, there's more pink in the outer ring than the inner ring, which indicates there's an increase in the drive market compared to last year. Conversely, if there's more purple in the outer ring than the inner ring, which is the case for all 3 of the other Florida destinations, that indicates an uptick in people that are flying to that destination. The shifts are relatively small comparing 2019 to 2019, about a 5% increase in the drive market for Orlando and a 4% increase in the fly market for Tampa hotels. For Miami and other Florida beaches, it's about a 2% difference. Compared to the amount of advertising going into drive vacations and the press coverage, it appears that people planning to fly for their vacation are being ignored. That's our summary for 4th of July. Looking across the rest of the summer, we're struck by the prevalence of high-density destinations such as Las Vegas, Orlando, Miami, along with Honolulu, which requires at least a 6-hour flight. We've bolded them all here. We did also see demand for destinations close to national parks, and close to open space where people will be able to just spread out more. Here you see Denver on the chart. And as we looked at demand for secondary markets, we also saw places in Idaho, South Dakota, and Montana all popping up as well. The volume of demand for the high density and long haul destinations runs counter to common wisdom that suggests this summer is all about nearcation. And it suggests that consumers are more comfortable traveling than our other indicators are telling us. Accurately gauging consumer willingness to travel is vitally important. Overestimate the demand and you waste your resources attempting to attract and fill demand that's not there. Underestimate and your competitors win. What do these early indicators on demand for certain destinations tell us about consumer confidence? You'll see in the arrows the accepted wisdom of how we expect consumers will re-engage and as we move out of quarantines and shelter-in-place restrictions. It'll start with dining, then drive vacations, next a short-haul flight for leisure, then a long-haul flight for a leisure break, and then finally an overseas trip. And we'll know we're back to full-blown new normal when people are attending business conferences. This chart has the first 4 arrows filled in to represent where Adara's data is telling us what consumers are comfortable with. Our view is that the prevalence of air trips and even long-haul air suggests more consumer resilience than expected. Let's turn now to dining and entertainment, and then a couple slides on EMEA. The chart on the left depicts dining reservation volume by week, indexed to the 1st of January. For Tampa and turquoise at the top, Tampa is at 60% of the restaurant reservation dining compared to pre-COVID. Dallas is at about 35%. Las Vegas is yellow at 22%. Chicago announced restaurants could open for outdoor dining on May 29th, where you see the orange dot. And you can see it's quickly taken off, become more vertical, partly because you can only dine in a restaurant with a reservation. New York is still restricted for dining, so you see a flat line. For the bar chart on the right, Dallas and Tampa, and to a slightly lesser extent, Las Vegas, have the most reservations, the proportion of reservations in the short 1-week horizon, while Chicago is looking further out, as is New York. For entertainment, after a bump earlier in May as new programs became available, the volume of event bookings has remained relatively stable. You can see the top 10 events on the right, and those are primarily for music. Switching to EMEA, EMEA is continuing to see a steady improvement in air booking volume for both business and leisure travel. If we compare booking activity to the very lowest point of the COVID period in late April, which is a lower point of COVID, to the last 3 weeks, we can see there's been an 8-point increase in business and a 6-point increase for leisure. They're on the chart. The UK provides an interesting example of the impact of travel restrictions and quarantines. A mandatory 14-day quarantine was confirmed for the UK for May 22nd and implemented this week, meaning anybody traveling air or overseas was required to register where they were going to be and stay in that location for 14 days. And the police had the opportunity to come and check on them, or they were subject to being checked on and a fine if they weren't where they said they were going to be. For business air bookings from volume to the UK from international origins within EMEA, it dropped 2 spots from rank 3 to rank 5. The impact was more obvious for leisure, where pre-quarantine bookings put the UK at rank 2 for bookings made between May 1st and May 15th. For bookings made between May 6th and June 7th, the UK dropped 6 slots from rank 2 to rank 8. So you can see the impact that government policy can have on booking activity. Before I turn it over to David and Raj, we wanted to share with you an important event happening today in about 45 minutes, 9 a.m. Pacific. The U.S. Travel Association is hosting a conversation about race and diversity within the travel industry and how we can work toward a more inclusive environment. You'll see the registration link in the chat box. It's listed here on the website. Adara is proud that our Chief Revenue Officer, Brandon Myers, is also one of the speakers. With that, David, over to you.
Thank you, Carolyn, and I'm delighted to be back here today with our special guest, Raj Singh, who is Managing Director of Jetblue Technology Ventures. And for anyone who isn't familiar with Jetblue Technology Ventures, They incubate, invest, and partner with early stage startups at the intersection of technology, travel, and hospitality. So thank you so much for joining us this morning, Raj. Tell us a little bit about what you and JetBlue Technology Ventures have been doing in the past few months during the COVID crisis.
Absolutely. Thank you, David. Thank you, Dara, for having me, and good morning, everybody. So as you can imagine, it's been a fairly busy period over the last few months, given what's happened to us as a society and the industry in particular. So JetBlue Technology Ventures, as David mentioned, we're a wholly owned subsidiary of JetBlue Airways, the airline. And if you like, we're somehow caught in the middle of what's going on here. On the one hand, JetBlue as an airline has been suffering in the same way as the industry has very generally. And then on the other side, we have a portfolio of 27 companies that we've invested in, all of whom are in travel and hospitality sector. So both our parent company and the startups themselves have been suffering due to the precipitous drop in demand, as evidenced by Karen's slides earlier. So our usual pace, if you like, is a combination of investing in new startups, helping the current portfolio, and then working with the parent company, JetBlue, and its partners in order to implement strategic solutions based in part or whole on the startups' products and services, the ones that we've invested in. So that's changed significantly, where we have essentially shifted from that model to one of helping the portfolio to, frankly, survive in some cases. So if you think about any group of diverse assets, there will be some form of curve between them. On the one hand, there will be some companies who are in a fortunate position. They've raised enough money. They have other lines of business beyond travel and transportation that may be still going along at a certain pace, and business may be good. Those companies probably will survive this crisis. On the other end of the scale, there'll be a number of companies who either were not doing terribly well to start with, or were planning to fundraise, a normal and essential part of the cycle of being a startup. And unfortunately for them, the market for fundraising has closed almost entirely due to COVID-19. So most of our work has been focused on helping those companies that have difficulties to survive. In some cases, that has meant, regrettably, job losses. In some cases, that has been looking to see whether they are eligible for some of the government aid programs that are out there right now and helping them apply if that's the case. And in many cases, it's also been a question of strategy. How do they evolve their strategy? How do they change what they're doing in order to, at the very least, survive this period and hopefully come out stronger? So our days have been relatively busy involved in that. And I feel that we're at the point now where we kind of know what will happen in the sense of we have plans in place, we have strategies that have been worked out, and now those companies are executing on them. So the pace has slackened slightly as everybody sort of has their nose to the grindstone and is trying to work. So it's been a very, very volatile period. Don't know when it returns back to normal, but certainly in the world of startups, it's not something that is entirely unexpected, as we have obviously been through a number of these crises in the past, not specifically related to COVID-19, but imagine the dot-com crash in the early 2000s, the Lehman Brothers financial crisis. All of these have precipitated similar sorts of periods of uncertainty, resulting in a few companies unfortunately not making it, but also some companies who started in that period becoming very successful.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that perspective. That's really interesting. And I guess in the startup world, change is certainly something that people are used to. So, so let's turn to the topic at hand today. So before COVID, the travel industry was blazing trails and enhancing the customer experience by merchandising services such as tourism activities with extra flight flexibility and the ability to gift travel. So since COVID, has the focus turned entirely to safety and hygiene, or are there still opportunities to delight and entice?
I think this is a great question, and I'm not going to pretend I know the entire answer to this. But I think, honestly, the reality right now is related to consumer confidence. Do people feel that it's safe to travel? And the view that we would have from a very high level is that yes, the actual act of traveling itself is safe and is not likely to be a problem if you decide you want to travel. However, how do we demonstrate that to people and show them that that this is safe? So right now, yes, it's absolutely all about safety and hygiene. So the sorts of things that that the airlines are thinking about are around how do I ensure the plane is not only sparkling clean, but is seen to be sparkling clean. So if you have actually traveled recently, what you'll notice is when you're at the gate is that on these screens that show you the status of your flight, they now include images of the plane being cleaned. There's a sort of slot in the process where it says, okay, before you board, we're in the pre-boarding process, the plane's just being cleaned. And so we're kind of showing people what we're doing. The whole industry has been looking at potential solutions from other industries that might be helpful. An example is UV lights. So UV lights, certain wavelengths are used in hospitals in order to kill bacteria. So the industry has been looking to see whether it can adapt to those sorts of machines to use them within, inside the plane.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of, if you like, addressing the issue of, what happens inside the plane. There's a whole other debate around the filters that are used and how fresh air gets circulated in the plane as well. And then on the other side, it's about the customers themselves. So, customers are requested to wear masks. There are potentially spot checks on temperature. And essentially everybody's being encouraged to not travel if they're not feeling well in any shape or form. So how far that goes is an open question. China has gone down the path of essentially a health passport where they track your health and decide whether you are able to go or not. That's not something that's necessarily palatable elsewhere in the world. Yeah. But to be honest, every option is being considered because, as I say, really right now, it is all about safety and hygiene. And once that is assured, then the question comes back, can we still delight people? Will it be in the same way as we tried to do it previously, or will we need to change the things that we focus on in order to be able to adapt to the current situation?
And in a way, all of these hygiene protocols, does that alert people to the fact even more that actually what I'm doing is risky? For example, we've seen the jarring images of flight attendants in full hazmat suits. Not every airline, obviously, but some airlines have implemented that. And can the airline industry make these protocols work?
I think it's a great question. Some of the images that have been floating out there have been from trial runs, pilot flights, test flights. So I don't think there are many, if any, airlines that are trying or hoping to deliberately wear hazmat suits during the flight. Sure. Look, I think that the point is a good one. You risk worrying people by drawing attention, but to be honest, I think where we are right now, it really is about transparency. So people are trying to err on the side of caution. We don't believe that we'll see hazmat suits flying. What I think will happen is that people will take sensible precautions, and those sensible precautions are around the use of masks, making sure the area around you is clean, and then looking at the elements of service that would be traditionally provided in aviation and also in hospitality, and discarding those that might be problematic, and trying to ensure that the ones that you do keep or the ones that you add are clearly not an issue. I think one of the things that premium cabins are very are well known for is their food service. It may not be that one can provide that same level currently of service as you might have done previously. So how might we change that? Well, we might think about people allowing them to take an order and deliver that food to the plane for them as an individual delivery, as opposed to something that's been prepared on the plane itself. And so on the one hand, that's obviously different from what it is today. On the other hand, it's an opportunity actually to personalize the experience even further. So these are the sorts of areas where I think people will experiment.
That's great. That's great. So, aside from hygiene, how are leading industry executives in the space adapting and innovating in order to navigate the current crisis and prepare for what's next?
So I think one of the things that you'll see in the industry is around capacity and destinations. So all of the airlines have been rethinking their route networks. Where should I be traveling to, and what sort of capacity should I have on that route? And that evolution of it's always a fine balance between supply and demand that will continue to evolve. A lot of the executives have come out on record, including Robin Hayes, who's the CEO of JetBlue, stating that the industry will be smaller once we come out of this, and that seems like a reasonable assumption. So if that's the case, where then should you fly to? At the same time, the airlines are now experimenting with the fare package. So if you think about when you buy a ticket, what essentially you're buying is the right to fly from destination A to destination B, and then that right to fly gets tied to a specific flight, and then a whole series of ancillary services, be it bags, be it the type of seat, it might even be the type of food. And so breaking those things down, it's possible to innovate along the entire range. The example that everybody I'm sure is familiar with is change fees and cancellation fees. So, looking at Carolyn's observations earlier, it may be true that the number of bookings have increased, but that may not reflect the number of cancellations and the actual number of flights flown. And so right now in the industry, a lot of those aspects of the business model have been essentially removed. And then the question then becomes, how much does the traveling public become used to that and demand that to continue when things start to return to some sense of normalcy? So I think there will be a lot of innovation around the package of the fare itself. The other thing that we've seen that's been actually started pre-COVID was the ability to pay for a vacation over time. And so this is addressing the situation where you may be able to afford a vacation, but it may take you a while to save for it. Can we use something like a layaway plan or a modern version that would allow you to do that? So I think we'll continue to see innovations like those, and some of those will stick post recovery.
Yeah. And I guess one of the biggest challenges for the aviation industry is the fact that it's a huge fixed cost business, and it requires a certain load factor to be viable. So, blocking of middle seats seems to be the thing to do at the moment. I mean, how long is that sustainable for?
Not very long, in my opinion. I think that, as you said, it's a high fixed cost business. If you take out 1/3 of all the seats, because you remove all the middle seats, it's going to make it extremely difficult for airlines to survive. I think of airlines as being somewhat similar to banks. Banks take deposits from us as customers, and they go and lend that money to other people, but often they lend it at very long terms. And so if all of us ran to the bank tomorrow and tried to withdraw our money, we wouldn't be able to. It's not there. And so there's a mismatch between the long-term obligations and the short-term obligations that a bank has. Airlines are somewhat similar. We spend a huge amount of money buying aircraft, maintaining aircraft. We spend a lot of money on the slots that we might have at any one airport, and then we rent out those assets that are worth hundreds of millions of dollars 3 hours at a time to one person at a time. And so when that short-term traveler dries up, you're stuck with this huge fixed cost. And so the issue for I think for the middle seat and for thinking about capacity is that it's really hard for the business model to survive that. So either you increase prices, which I guess nobody really wants to see, or you come up with a different solution. I think the problem for us is that a small decrease in the demand has a huge impact on profitability. And so in many ways, airlines have to grapple with the problem of that short-term versus long-term asset mix. And so for me, I think that if we can show that being on the airline is as safe as being anywhere else, I think the middle seat has to come back.
And certainly at the moment, there's a lot of very attractive pricing out there to encourage people to book. And do you think that will attract more novice travelers or younger travelers who are potentially less risk averse? Or do you think it's going to be, the seasoned regular travelers that are missing their airline experience, missing the feeling of being on the move?
I have to tell you, I mean, I haven't moved from my home for the last 3 months, and I can't wait to go somewhere. So I think it does become a combination. Look, there's some interesting ideas I've seen floated out there. Flights for younger people only, and so on. And so I could imagine some innovation around that area. I just think it's very difficult to do. So my view is there is a pent-up demand for travel. People often talk about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and so you've got all these essential things as a human being that you want to have in your life to feel safe and secure. And then after that, what do you do? And one of the first things that people do when they have some disposable income is they travel. I don't believe that's gone away. I think that people will want to do that. And the question becomes, will they be able to afford to, and will they feel comfortable doing so? And look, I think that looking at previous shocks, it's always come back. And 2019 was a record year in many ways for travel. And so, whereas we may not get back to 2019 levels immediately, I'm confident that we will get back to levels that would allow the industry to be profitable again. And the question is how long that takes. So, I think that does happen. The other thing I think that happens is, there were some changes that were happening in the industry anyway. I mentioned, these things around financing plans, but also in terms of distribution and the way that people are thinking about how and where customers can purchase their travel. And so I think that, in some of that will be accelerated. Simply because now is a time when you could actually experiment, because there's so little volume out there to be disrupted. So I think that we will also see a few changes that will come out of this that aren't directly related to the crisis, but will have been sped up because people had a chance to try it out.
Great. And talking about changes to the business model, and staffing levels. Obviously, with a lot less people flying and huge fixed costs, there's an impetus to reduce overall costs, and one way of doing that is on staffing levels. So, for example, particularly at smaller airports, could there be more of a move towards shared staffing with other airlines and non-branded staff at airports?
I think that's an excellent point. It's certainly possible. Today, there are a number of things at the airports that are shared, and so could that continue? Yes, I think it could. I think the issue obviously is, as a travel provider, you want people to know very clearly that your brand promises them a certain experience, a certain customer journey, and so you want to make sure that you can deliver that. And so controlling the people and the resources that deliver that is important to some extent. Having said that, I think yes, it will change a little bit. I think actually what may happen is, rather than it being a trend towards more shared resources, it may be that it moves more towards self-service. And by self-service here, what I mean is contactless and touchless concepts. So, as we mentioned earlier, thinking about how you change your business model to ensure people's safety and well-being, one of the ways that you can do that is by reducing the number of points where people need to interact with other people or with machines like touchscreens or whatever it might be. And so there may well be an increase in shared services, but there may also be an increase in the ability for a customer to essentially sail through the airport without having to interact with as many people as they would have done previously. And so I think there'll be, that trend is potentially even more radically cost saving, and potentially even more soothing for travelers. So I expect that one to be as important, if not more, than shared services.
Okay, great. So turning to demand, And Carolyn has obviously been going through a lot of the tipping points that we're looking at Adara for the return of demand. What are the tipping points and inflection points that you're looking out for?
Yeah, I mean, it's heartening to see that demand is improving, but I would still note that we're still sort of 85% down from where we were a year ago. So it's very early days, and it could change. I think tipping points that we're thinking about, certainly on the leisure side, are the reopening of certain destinations. So as a leisure traveler, you may well travel. You might want to go to Disney World or Universal Studios. Are those places open? Can you actually go there? And we know that Disney World is starting to cautiously reopen on a limited basis. So as that reopens, that will prompt people to think about what their travel plans might be.
Yeah.
In the US, I think one of the biggest travel weekends is Thanksgiving. And people tend to book that relatively far in advance. So let's start looking at Thanksgiving trends, and I'm sure you guys will do that, and see whether what the sentiment is about booking those seats as well. So on the leisure side, I think that's going to be important. There are other similar sorts of vacation periods in other countries that will also be important to check. And to see how they're filling out. And I think we just have to be cautious, because booking isn't necessarily the same as traveling, especially given the lack of a change fee or a cancellation fee. So yes, so I think that's one thing. And then on the business side, my suspicion is that there will be a small amount of business travel that will never come back. And the reason for that is that people will still want to travel to close that big deal, to make the initial contact, but there may be points in between those two events where you say, well, I might have traveled for a meeting, but now I could do that over a video link. And I do believe, going back to this concept of this being a time for innovation, I do believe that people will come out with better ways of doing what Zoom is doing today. I'm not saying Zoom is doing a bad job; they're doing great. But the point is that the fidelity of the interaction that we have here is not as great as it could be face to face. So I think business travel, is going to take a longer time to recover. And the indicator there for us is, when do events like this one become hybrid, and when do they eventually become in person again? But I do believe that that's quite far off.
Mm-hmm. You talked about Thanksgiving and that being a huge booking period, probably the biggest of the year for the US. Given the fact that almost all tickets are currently refundable and don't have any change fees, is there any reason not to book to secure good deals right now?
I would encourage people to book. Having said that, it's not that, as far as I know, I don't have the latest data, I haven't seen like a huge number of bookings happening. So I see no reason why one wouldn't do it. But for whatever, well, okay, maybe there is a reason, which is, a lot of people in the US have been hammered by losing their jobs or having a downgrade in number of hours that they work. And so it may well be that they're not ready to commit that money in any form right now. And they'll just wait and see to hopefully regain their jobs, find something else, and get the income stream back again. So that may be the reason why people aren't booking. But if you do have the disposable income and and you'd like to travel, I see no reason why you wouldn't do it.
I'm going to turn to a question from the audience now, actually. So from Will Crockett. So in America, especially, consumers have seen their options for airlines to fly steadily decrease as airlines are bought out or fold over the years. Do you anticipate the COVID-19 crisis will leave consumers with even less options than before?
If we're talking about the major airlines, I would be surprised to see much in the way of consolidation, because we're down to a relatively small number, and there will be issues around competition if we reduce that even further. However, in the smaller and regional airlines, I do believe that some of them will find it very difficult to move forward. So I think what that translates into is that the smaller hubs and regional airports airports will have less service than they might have done previously, whereas the major destinations and hubs will probably be just fine.
Right. Given forecasting tools, turning to forecasting tools, given that they're generally based on past observations, are there new tools and data that are needed to detect and capture nascent demand?
I would say that we probably have the things that we need today. The issue is that they're not well connected. If I might plug one of my companies in our portfolio, Three Victors, they're looking at that data from a wide range of sources, and what we actually need is for more companies to gather the data, analyze it, and come up with insights. So it's not that we necessarily need new things, it's that we actually need access to what's already available. One of the biggest issues that we see in the travel industry is this lack of connectivity, and it's a nut that people have been chasing after for quite some years now. If we are to enable a seamless journey for the customer, we need to be able to take the data from the different parts of their journey and bring that together and work out, perhaps using machine learning in many cases, how do we alter one part of the journey given what happened to the first part. And so all that information is there, but the sharing of that data is not there. And so it's more, we need to put in place the ability for organizations to safely share and monetize the data that they have in order for these services to be delivered. So I think we can do that. It's more a question of we haven't found the right business model that people are comfortable with when it comes to sharing data at a non-personally identifiable level that would allow this to happen.
Mm-hmm. Right. And let's turn quickly to loyalty. So do you think travelers' affinity for preferred brands will have waned or stayed steady?
I think that's a tricky one because there's a difference between what people say they are going to do and what they actually do. Mm-hmm. So in the US, I think, the US is a very price-sensitive market. And so whereas somebody may be very loyal to Airline X, when it comes down to it, a lot of people, and this is more in the leisure market, will book the cheapest fare. Mm-hmm. And so, and that's fine. That's their prerogative. But what it indicates to me is that professed loyalty is different from what they actually end up doing. Again, to plug JetBlue for a second, JetBlue does have a very loyal group of customers, and so I do see people who really appreciate the brand of service that JetBlue provides, and they will look for JetBlue flights. But in general, I would say that as long as you see the airline that you prefer still serving the routes that you need to use, and as long as you are comfortable that they are doing the right things in order to look after you and ensure you safely arrive at your destination, I don't see why you would necessarily change your affiliation. Mm-hmm. But the reality will be that it won't always be the case that you'll see that, and it will definitely be the case that some of the routes that traditionally you might have used will not be there anymore, or will be more difficult, and in which case you are probably going to look for something else. But yeah. I think that if you sort of, once you've done all the shaking and baking, I doubt that the share of any particular airline is going to change significantly after all of that's done and dusted.
Mm-hmm. Right. It is an interesting question. I mean, I this morning I received an email from British Airways. I'm a British Airways loyalty member, and they're extending your loyalty status for 1 year. And it looked ostensibly that was for everybody. I thought, great. But apparently people whose years renewed in April, May and June, they're not doing that. And I'm May. So I'm now at this interesting point where I've got 0 points for the year ahead, a blank canvas. I could switch loyalty. It's an opportunity to switch loyalty that I've never had before. And so I think it's providing some interesting opportunities. So very interesting times. What do you think the industry can learn from this crisis to be better prepared for the next one? Hopefully not next one, but if it happens.
You know, I'm a bit of a cynic. I am absolutely convinced that there will be a next one. You know, we are an interconnected world, and you know, and travel is a huge part of that. And there will inevitably be another crisis, something similar to this. You know, I'm not a doctor. I don't understand the details of how the virus works, but it seems to me that it's more close to the concept of the flu, by which I mean not the dangerous nature of it, but I mean that the fact that it returns. So I'm pretty sure that will happen again. So I think as an industry, what do we need to learn? We need to learn how to more quickly identify when there's an issue, and essentially be able to change our processes as soon as we see something happening. And for me, that requires a sort of joined up level of data that would allow us to be able to see the signals. If it's happening in some other part of the world, we need to be able to see those signals very early and react very early. And the reality is that, as a connected world, these things will inevitably have the opportunity to spread. How we deal with that, I think is going to be very important. When we talk to our startups about their business model and how they might succeed in their path, a lot of the focus has been on the efficiency of the business model. How do you use the smallest amount of capital to get the best possible result?
Yeah.
And I think that the conversation will change, and this will also apply to larger companies and the travel industry more broadly, from not just efficiency, but also resilience. And so the question will then become, I need to build a business model, a supply chain, and a value chain that not only delivers the business results I want, but is resilient to these sorts of external shocks. And what we've seen right now is that it's been very, very hard for the industry to go through this crisis. What can we do to make a more resilient business model that will allow us to survive better the next time? And so I think that's where a lot of the thinking is going in, is, what do we do? If it's, it could be something as simple as, having the types of fleets that are able to service lots of different types of markets, not dedicated to one particular market, be it overseas or domestic. It could be the service levels and how we how we provide those service levels and how we can change those service levels quickly when we need to. But I think there's more to come. But I really do think it's about resilience, and the industry has had some very good years in the last few years. But if you look at the history of aviation in particular, it's not been the place that will really what's the right expression? It's been tough. There's been many, many lean years, and so how do we get to the point now where we can survive? Both the successful times and make sure that we have the resources that are salted away then, and also adapt quickly in the crisis periods. And so I think that's the lesson that people will take away. The good thing about the industry is that people who are in the industry tend to stick around. And so I hope that cadre of experienced people who've gone through this crisis will be able to implement the lessons in the future. I'm waffling, but I think it's resilience.
That's great to hear. That's a nice positive way of looking at it. We're at time, so I've just got one final question for you. Once this is all over and we can all travel again as we desire, where is the first place you will go to and why?
Yeah, well, as people can tell from my accent, I'm sure, I'm from the UK, and so I have family in London, and it's very prosaic, I know, but that's where